welcome to the Sport Representation panel. My name is Emma Rosen, and I'm a member of the Planning Committee for MSBC. A quick note is that after our conference today, we'll be sending out a survey, and we'd really appreciate it if you guys would all fill it out so we can get feedback on today. So to begin, we have our moderator, Grooms. We have the vice.
Come on, guys.
We can clap each time. He's the Vice President of Sports and Entertainment at French West Vaughan, where he helms marketing, public relations, endorsements, brand management, and services to professional athletes. While at French West Vaughan, he has created partnerships with Nike, Coke, Gatorade, Visa, GNC, Fathead, and more. And in 2010, the former Michigan point guard founded Grooms Athletic Management and Entertainment. We also have on our panel Sandy Montag. He's the Senior Corporate Vice President of IMG Sports and Entertainment.
No applause.
He is responsible for the operations of the client group, and IMG represents some of the most popular athletes, broadcasters, coaches, speakers, and personalities, including John Madden, Bob Costas, Peyton and Eli Manning, Bob Knight, and Justin Timberlake. Sandy has spent his entire professional career at IMG.
I didn't update it, David, sorry.
Joining the company in 1985 as an assistant to John Madden and was promoted to his current position in 2005. We have Maury Gostfrand. He's the president and founder of Vision Sports Group, a New York-based sports management and marketing agency representing primarily sports broadcasters at the regional and national sports television networks. He negotiates broadcasting agreements and secures marketing opportunities for his clients, including Chris Carter and John Kirk at ESPN, Kenny Smith at TNT, Jay Glazer at Fox Sports, and Hall of Fame baseball manager Joe Torre. After graduating from Michigan, Maury spent time at the agency's Athletes and Artists, Impact Sports, and RLR Associates. David Oxfeld is the Vice President of Client Sales and Business Development at Excel Sports Management, a full-service sports management and marketing agency representing some of the biggest names in professional sports, including Derek Jeter, Tiger Woods, Blake Griffin, Kevin Love, Clayton Kershaw, Peyton Manning, Danica Patrick, and more. David is responsible for maximizing talent's earning potential through strategic marketing and partnerships. He played an integral role in pioneering Jeter Publishing, the first ever athlete co-venture publishing imprint, and engineered Samsung's partnership with the Players Tribune, a first-of-its-kind media property owned by athletes directly and launched by Derek Jeter. Prior to joining Excel, the Michigan graduate spent 7 years with Sportsnet New York, home of the New York Mets, as the director of integrated sales and an account executive in sponsorship sales, and was the manager of marketing partnerships at Madison Square Garden. And last but not least, Levine is the Vice President of Business Development and Partnership Marketing at Rock Nation, where he is responsible for developing revenue opportunities for the full-service company, inclusive of athletes, artists, songwriters, music publishing, touring, film and television, and special events. Evan has spent the last year and a half brokering strategic partnerships with major brands, including 2K Sports, Adidas, Alaska Airlines, BBVA, Body Armor, HTC, Sprint, Sparkling Ice, Pepsi, Wilson, and more, as well as the groundbreaking partnership with JP Morgan Chase for the On the Run tour featuring Beyonce and Jay-Z. Evan has over 10 years of industry experience, including time spent at USA Today Sports Media Group and at the NBA, where he began his career. So we're really lucky to have all of them.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the Sports Representation Panel. The theme for this panel here today is the role of the sports agent has rapidly shifted and grown over the last decade. From basic contract negotiations to personal branding, marketing, what would the future hold for inspiring sports agents? So what I like to do is tee up a couple questions kind of related to the theme, and then we're going to have a Q&A session where you guys can ask these game changers any questions that you may have to get some insight and some intel. So kind of jumping right into it, in what ways do you guys see the representation of talent kind of changing and evolving? And if you could each of you provide an example of what a typical day is like servicing a client in 2014 versus what it may have been like 10 years ago?
So that they teed me up. They said the oldest guy has to go first. So feels like we have it like we're testifying here.
That's true.
He did it. Well, there really is, when you're in client representation, there is no normal day. I spend, for the past 29, 30 years, I've overseeing our clients group at IMG, which are broadcasters, athletes for marketing, coaches, our speakers bureau, literary. So half of my day has been managing employees, which really isn't, the best part of my day. I oversee about 75 clients myself, so half my day really is interfacing with them, putting out fires. When you do a deal, when you negotiate, it takes a short period of time really to do it. You then have the term of the deal to service your client and make sure that they're happy. Things are always changing. So that's how I spend most of my day. The other thing that I launched 10 years ago was a crisis management media training company with Ari Fleischer. And given what's going on in the world of sports today, I'm spending more and more of my time as a professional firefighter. Maury?
Transition. Can I lift this up? Yes, I can. I guess similar to Sandy, it's client management. There's no blueprint for how you manage the on-air talent, which I specifically work with, is on-air talent, play-by-play announcers, analysts, reporters, a lot of former players. So negotiating the contract is fun. You get it done. But there's just a lot of issues that come after that. As Sandy said, putting out fires. Like, well, what can that be? Well, there could be a conflict. There could be someone's schedule. There could be a miscommunication. There's just always something that goes on. And I don't want to come across like this business isn't that attractive. It is. But you are dealing with people who need a lot of attention, and they want your attention. They want to know that they're at the top of mind and a priority, even though you have other clients. I do enjoy it, and I think the second part of your question was how different is it today than 10 years ago? Well, years ago when I started, and Sandy as well, there was no such thing as the Big Ten network. There was no such thing as the NFL network or the MLB network or the SEC network. So it's great for business that all these new networks have been launching over the last 5, 10 years, more jobs. And don't forget the digital side. There's SB Nation, there's Bleacher Report, 120 Sports, Yahoo. They all need talent. So we've been pretty fortunate, I think, to be at a good time to be in this business in representing talent. And then don't forget the national radio networks. It used to be ESPN and maybe Fox. Now it's CBS Radio, NBC Radio. It just goes on and on. So I think the expectations of a client today, hey, did you hear about that opening over at Yahoo? No, let me get right on it, because it's very difficult to hear of every single opening at every network, at every regional network, at every radio station. So there's a lot of pressure, and it's a big challenge to be on top of every single opportunity out there.
So I think that there's an important distinction, I guess, between what I do and what both Sandy and Maury do. I work for agents who are the daily contact for our roster of athletes, and then I look for corporate sponsorship opportunities for the guys. So, I have fires to put out, I think, as we all do, but maybe fortunately in my case, I'm not always the first go-to on that. They go to their agents with complaints, and then they file down. So I don't have as many daily management concerns or responsibilities. And also, I've only been in the player side for 2.5, 3 years. I worked in team sponsorship at Madison Square Garden, and then for the Mets and their integrated assets before that. So I'm not the best person to speak about where it's been 10 years ago to where it's going now. But I think from what I understand and from the experience I have, there's just different expectations now from a marketing capacity, specific to what I do, that when you join an agency, it's not just the contract negotiation. There's a marketing expectation. There's a social media expectation. There's a will you help me manage my PR expectation? Will you help with my charity expectation? And I think that people are coming, especially in the competition that now exists in recruiting, as Rock Nation develops an agency and all of the different folks that are out there now, the players have expectations that might have not existed a few years back. And then as far as a daily routine, similar to what these guys said, there really is no blueprint. There isn't I think no day is the same, but we try to be as proactive, but I think a lot of times you end up being reactive with some guy might call in and say, hey, why did KD get this deal at Rock Nation, and what are you doing for me? And then you got to go find deals for that particular player. If you have something coming up from a charity event perspective or a concert tour or something that you're celebrating, Derek Jeter's last year, a 3,000th hit, then you try to be proactive in finding opportunities that sort of go around that. But for the most part, unfortunately, I think the business is often reactive as you're trying to service people that might have more needs at a specific time.
Yeah, and I would say, I think Ox and I do very similar, the same thing, or David, excuse me. But what's interesting is, I don't think, and Sandy and Maury probably can speak better to this, the business hasn't changed, just more needs. We're always putting out fires. Everything is important ASAP right now, right? But now you see it. Rock Nation, for instance, and I know excels very much the same way. We have business development, which we do. There's creative marketing, there's social media marketing, there's all these different assets underneath one umbrella. I'm sure IMG is very much the same way. And so the business hasn't changed. What needs to get done for a client hasn't changed, it's just that there's more out there for them to generate revenue off of. And it's our jobs. And, to David's other point, I think we're trying to always be proactive. And I think in my day-to-day, life at work, I'm always trying to look for what the next brand that's going to break is, or think of things like Jeter Publishing, which is a great example of something that's never been done before, because we want the Excels of the world, the IMGs of the world, to follow our footsteps, and I think we're all following each other's footsteps in different capacities. If he gets a deal done, I want to know what company that is and try and look in that direction. So, we feed off each other at the same time. I think we're all trying to evolve into where those new opportunities are across several different categories for revenue.
I think, Hayes, I didn't answer your second part, but I think clients in general have gotten smarter. As time goes on, I think athletes that want to get into broadcasting are spending more time while they're playing, polishing their craft, doing local TV. And I think, when you talk about expectations, a lot of it is they're just smarter, they're well-versed, they have more of a team around them, and that's the difference that I've seen. I mean, when I started with John Madden 30 years ago, it was John and me, and there was no one else. But now, if I were to work with the John Madden today, there'd be 8 people around him. And I think it's really, clients are just a lot smarter.
Let's touch on branding a little bit. Branding seems to be a big thing in our industry. How do each of you or your firms go about strategically defining a personal brand? I'm assuming each of your clients all have a unique brand. And kind of talk to the group about how that personal branding impacts, contract negotiations, sales, marketing opportunities, broadcast, media placements.
I think there isn't a secret formula to it. When you have a client, you got to understand everything about them, what their likes, their dislikes are, their passion points. What video games do they play as a child? Those types of details. Do they wear orthotics when they play? These little things that not only can create stories, but also can create opportunities. I give a perfect example of Kevin Durant, who for a very long time was a Gatorade endorser, but in fact doesn't really drink their product. Turns out that he drinks sparkling ice, a product that I had never heard of in my entire life, out of Preston, Washington. And 6 months later, he is their key endorser, because at the end of the day, that's what he wanted. He wanted to be in business with this authentic connection, this brand. And so I think that word authenticity is something that we hold very dear, to try and find those cross points to tell an authentic story. I also think of that, one thing, if you look at the Duracell commercial with the running back on the Seahawks, I mean, that's storytelling. That's what Derek Coleman, we're trying to find that type of story, because that impacts from not only a marketing perspective for a brand, but also for the player, and tells their story. I mean, every day that's what we're trying to do.
And I'll add, Evan claims he had nothing to do with the sparkling ice on everybody's table, but I don't buy it. I think Evan's right on, and I think specifically when you're trying to sell an athlete in the market to corporate America, the more you know about them, the better you are at selling them. So not only does it become more authentic for the particular player, which is probably going to make him or her more likely to want to do the deal, which is, certainly our end game, because you got to remember, sort of differently than when you work for a property, when you're representing a human being, you might be out finding a deal for him or her, but if the client needs them on a game day and the only time they can do it is from 8 to 9 and they shoot around to 10 to 11 and they don't want to do it, no matter the effort that we've put in, it's just not going to work. So to sort of counteract that, you want to make sure that you're doing things that are specific to things that they're interested in, and then it makes us more educated in the market as we're looking for opportunities for them. So I think it's really important to understand their brand when targeting specific brands that you're trying to pair with your athlete, really so that you're not wasting your time.
I don't want to give away any trade secrets to my competitors here, but I think they have them anyhow. But we do, when we sign a new client, we go through a 6-week exercise where we get them in a room with maybe 10 executives, and we do, the first thing we do is we do a 3-hour interview where basically we want to know everything about this client, and we have a big whiteboard, and we're putting up adjectives, we're putting up phrases, we're putting up their likes, everything about them. And then we go through a process, and by the end of the 6th week, we have a marketing plan and a PDF or whatever sales materials we use that really defines who that athlete is. And, we started doing it with Maria Sharapova years ago, and, we found it to be pretty effective because everyone's used the word expectations up here. And when the client can tell you what they want and what they're about, it's just a lot easier in managing them.
And just real quick to add, I think Sandy hit on something really important that's a key principle that whether you're in our business or any business is process to understand who that person is and or property, and then go out and set a strategy is the most important thing. I mean, all of us could go and just call 100 companies a day or 100 athletes a day, but you have to really have a process to it so that you're being effective to where that client's need is. So I think it's a great point he makes.
I agree. And from an announcer perspective, since that's who I work with primarily, these guys are very, very mindful of who they're associated with, right? I just had a client last week. He's part of Fox Baseball. Fox wanted him to do something, to tweet something out, and it was hokey. It really was. It didn't fit and his brand or his image, and it was good money, but he turned it down. Now, I've had other clients who are approached with an opportunity that doesn't fit, but the money's too good, and they'll do it because it's just a lot of money to turn down. So it really depends on the individual. You can give them advice and guidance as to what works for their brand, but I've had plenty of guys over the years, and we've seen commercials, let's be honest. No one represents him, but there's a Fox studio analyst who did a commercial a couple years ago that was pretty funny. And you probably like, why would he do that commercial? Well, the dollars are too good. And I think some guys are so set in their ways and don't care so much. Unlike the Kevin Durants who are still building their brand, there's guys who are in their 50s or 60s. They've been a studio analyst for many years. They want to make as much money as they can. So I've seen it both ways.
Well, and I'll just add to that with a little anecdote as well. Guys' brands in their minds change depending on timing and market. We have a player who was just traded to Cleveland. Not the most. Well, I guess LeBron wasn't traded. He signed as a free agent. Kevin Love was traded to Cleveland, and he's got a little bit more concerned, as he should, with the spotlight and people looking at him. We had a deal with one of his partners, the brand Starter, that makes throwback jackets, and there was a commitment in that to how he would announce his arrival in Cleveland. And he was very particular about the first time he acknowledged being in Cleveland, doing it in a way that was authentic to his brand, but still met the sort of agreement that we had made with Starter. And there was a lot of back and forth, and ultimately it worked out really well. He posted an Instagram picture in front of a billboard that they put up in Cleveland of him holding his jacket. Got about 55,000 likes on Instagram. We got lucky. LeBron also retweeted it, which got another 360,000 likes on Instagram. But it was a win-win for everybody, and it was done authentically, and Kevin was happy about it, and the brand was happy about it. It was all being cognizant of doing it in the right way.
I think it's interesting to talk about that Kevin Love example. To Maury's point also about partnerships. In our business today, it's really important that either the athlete involved or directly and or his team's involved with the brand, and you're trying to reach their common goals on both sides of the table. They're obviously, many years ago, you're just throwing someone into an ad. There's no connection to who that brand is. But today, success is really based on making that authentic connection come through throughout all the materials. So I think that's something we're always working on once the deal is done, to try and find that intersection and build from there, so that you have successful campaigns like one that you did with, Kevin and Starter.
Well, and I think the irony there is, and we haven't mentioned social media really at all, which is sort of surprising that we've gone on this long without social media, and that's really what's changed. But as Evan said, it used to be you did a deal, you put him in a couple, you did 2 production days, 2 appearances, the ad campaign came out 6 weeks later, and you moved on. Now brands want to take advantage of the moment because there is a way to do that. There wasn't a way to do that. So in this Kevin Love Starter example, when he got traded, they wanted to take advantage of that moment, whereas probably even just a few years ago, there wouldn't have been a way to do that sort of that timely. They would have had to wait till he could put on a Cavs jersey, take a picture, use it, or a Cavs jacket, use it. Now with social media, the expectations are different.
Yeah, what kind of leads me to my next question, is that your clients have platforms. They're visible to millions of people domestically, internationally. How do each of you kind of go about leveraging that platform to really maximize opportunities, whether it's an endorsement, or whether it's a deal with MSBC, or any other opportunities off the court or off the field?
I think David should take this one.
Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, for the most part, I think we're fortunate at Excel that the majority of our athletes are recognizable, well-known, right? Because that's the first battle, is that more often than not, the brand's going to be interested based on the guy's social media following, his Q score, all of those sorts of things. So I think that's the first challenge. But then in today's world, I think endorsements are getting fewer and fewer. Those dollars are going down, and you have to find other ways to work with brands. So you use the word platform, right? I think continually we're trying to create charitable programs that might make sense for a guy's brand, but also allow us to work with corporate America in a different way. Or in the example with Derek Jeter, who just released the Players Tribune, it allows us to talk to companies about their digital budgets that might not want to do an endorsement, but might have an interest in working across a digital platform with a variety of athletes as opposed to just one. So I think you're constantly trying to create different platforms across guys' brands so that you can talk to advertisers in a different way.
I think, when you talk about brands, and we talk about also doing deals, I mean, you have to have a reason for doing a deal. So most of you out there think, okay, we're agents, although I hate that word, but we're agents and we make our clients money and it's all show me the money. But it's really not, a lot of it is their brand, and having a platform, whether it's charitable or a cause that they believe in, kind of fuels the brand. So not every time you do something, I don't think Derek did this new publication to make a boatload of money. I think it's a platform to launch the rest of his life and career. So, it's not always, all right, well, how much money are we going to make from that? You may make nothing. You may actually spend a few dollars. But in the long run, the base of your foundation is really helped by something like that. And I think Joe Torre's, really a good example.
Joe is a good example, but before we get into Joe, the names we've heard up here, Kevin Durant, Derek Jeter, John Madden, these are the A-list superstars in the business. Being a sports agent, if you ever get into this business, most of them are not, okay? There are a lot of players, former players, announcer types who are just making a good career out of it. They're not that marketable. So here we are talking about the superstars. We're giving you examples. But being a sports agent, you got to deal with the bad too. And when I say the bad is when you get a phone call from the network saying we're not renewing your client. The bad is when a player gets cut the last week of August for the NFL. My clients have a lot of competition for endorsement dollars with Sandy's clientele and others. Now you're seeing more and more commercials and endorsements with announcers lately. I think right? I mean, you look at, you see Bill Cowher, you see all these guys on these commercials. Maybe because announcers are a little bit more secure than a player. Players have messed up, as we've seen the last month or two. They're still, of course, for the most part, good. But I just wanted the message is when you represent talent or players, there's all different kinds. The guys that excel in Rock Nation have high-level clientele. I think the average sports agent represents maybe mid-level people. That's just the way it is. So we have so much competition for endorsement dollars for our guys. I'm not going to get a national TV commercial per se for an announcer or former player type, but I may get an appearance. I may get a satellite media tour, radio media tour with a company. We do media campaigns, awareness campaigns. We just try and be very creative and proactive and aggressive with the NFL sponsors, the NBA sponsors, the MLB sponsors, since these are the companies that are going to want to activate around their sponsorship. We're calling them. What promotions you doing this year? What sweepstakes you doing this year? Can our guy be the spokesperson for that? So it's a lot of cold calling and a lot of aggressive calling. But I just want to be clear. Now, Joe, I've been fortunate to work with Joe Torre, who's just an incredible man, and he's been very marketable over the years because of his success in New York. I would say the phone has been ringing for Joe for many years, but for the most part, the phone doesn't ring. You got to make the calls and be creative and put your guy in the right spot.
Today, the issue of the day for causes domestic violence, and I think that, a lot of our clients, like a client of mine, James Brown specifically, he was on Thursday Night Football when this all went down, and he had a 2-minute commentary really on the subject, which hit home for him. And I think a lot of our clients today are thinking, okay, how can I have an impact on society and on the world today? And I think, the ones that are not afraid to say something and do something, they'll build a larger brand as time goes on.
Yeah, it kind of leads me to the next question, Maury. Obviously, if you're an A-list or a C-list athlete, your career span is short. You only have a small window to be relevant. So how active are you guys in the planning process and helping these athletes at that second phase of their career? Because obviously, a lot of your clients are guys that are at the end of their career or have already decided to retire.
Yeah, again, I don't represent current athletes, right? So it's former athletes. So for me, it's a challenge to try and find athletes who are going to retire in a couple years and start a relationship with them, because there are other agencies that are doing everything for their clients. Back in the day, I used to call an agent, and he'd say, sure, go ahead and represent my guy for broadcasting. I have no interest in doing that. That was a long time ago. Now the CAAs and the Rock Nations and the XLs and everybody, they have broadcasting divisions. So once I do identify someone who maybe he's with a mom and pop agent, and the agent says, sure, we'd love to introduce you, or I get the guy directly. As Sandy said, there's so many opportunities now for guys to start and plan for a second career in broadcasting. If you have any interest at all, the NFL has boot camps, and there's 24/7 national sports network, the NFL network. You can go do stuff during your bye week. You can do stuff during the playoffs. And ESPN has year-round programming now for NFL. So if you're an NFL player who wants to get into broadcasting, there's no excuse. If you really want to dedicate yourself to it, there are opportunities out there, and we would help develop that for them.
Or in Brendan Marshall's case, you could do it while you're playing.
I think one of the problems that athletes are having, there's opportunity, but there's only so many jobs that are available. It used to be if you were an athlete, you would expect that when you retire that you're going to work for ESPN. Today, there's 1,000 NFL football players. You can no longer just retire unless you're a Peyton Manning or, a Troy Aikman. You can't just retire and fall into it. You really have to work at it throughout. So, just like Maury said, we spent a lot of time with athletes during their career trying to help them develop that. I think the NFL does a great job on the boot camp. I think the NBA does a good job. They used to have NFL Europe, where Fox would send talent over to Europe, current players who play in the NFL, just to try out as an announcer in the offseason to see how they did. So I think it's just more of an interaction between current athletes and people that represent them. And by the time they retire, most networks know who's going to be good and who's not going to be good.
And, aside from broadcasting, I think one thing, to Sandy's point, there's only so many deals to be had. And so we've had to get creative about doing things like launching a website or working with different brands that maybe are just starting out and building equity so that these players can plan for long term. Because if they're not going to go in broadcasting, they may want to go into business, or they may want to just have a fund that exists post-career. So we get creative all the time in that perspective, because as competitive we are, and potentially even sharing some things, we're also just trying to come up with new ideas to generate revenue. And there is so many different ways to do that, whether it's creating a social media platform, creating a digital website, buying equity into a beverage company. that's, to go back to the first question, is where the game has really changed, where it's not just 2 production days, it's not just transactional. It's very much so a longer lead, long-term partnership. In some cases, having this ownership stake in these companies is a new, facet.
Do you get many clients that want to, because you're with Rock Nation, that want to rap or want to get into music? Or?
Yeah, I think there's always a connection between music and sports, right? Musicians want to be athletes, athletes want to be musicians. I think that's an interesting cross section that we have. Whether I'd recommend that, no comment.
Yeah. No comment.
Whether you're a broadcasting agent, marketing agent, you got to have clients. Kind of talk to us through that recruiting process without giving away too much of the secret sauce. But how important is recruiting?
Those guys first, right?
Well, I think recruiting's pretty important. I mean, IMG was arguably the first sports management company in the business. And Mark McCormack's first 3 clients were Arnold Palmer, Gary Player, and Jack Nicklaus. So he had a pretty good start. But I think for us, it's. And I have a lot of people over the years who've really been sourcing, the up-and-coming talent. But we get so many referrals from our current clients. We've had a lot of clients that have been with us for 10 and 20 years, and we get a lot of referrals. We may be the largest sports management agency in the world, but we are very selective in the clients that we want to work with. We don't want to sign someone whose expectations are not realistic. So I think recruiting is important. I think also having a good relationship. We talked about before, playing defense is important. If you represent a John Madden, I want to keep John Madden happy. I don't necessarily want to go out and sign whomever, the next up-and-coming person is. So I believe a little bit more in defense, but recruiting is important, especially, if you're starting a practice like Rock Nation. I mean, you have to go out and recruit. So.
Yeah, we talked a little bit before about recruiting current athletes and how challenging that is I'm a smaller company than an IMG or an Excel. So, again, I have to be very, very selective in who we take on because, credibility is important. When you call ESPN and say, hey, guys, I got a new client, or you send the reel, you want them to look at it. You want them to, Maury's sending a client. He must be good or she must be good. If you just take on everybody and you're not selective, it'll hurt your credibility. But in today's day and age with digital, every team, every college has a digital reporter. There's so much young talent out there, young females, young males, that we're able to just proactively look at. And in the last year or two, we've signed 3 or 4 young, for us is big, 3 or 4 young announcer, reporter types that we're now seeing, they're growing. They're getting opportunities. We do get referrals as well. I'm not shy about telling a client who sent me the referral, hey, I appreciate the referral, but I don't think this guy's going to be any good. And I'm sorry. I'm not doing you a favor because you got to be passionate about who you represent. You got to believe in them. And it's so subjective, I know, but you got to believe in their talent. And if a player said, hey, could you represent my former teammate? No. If I don't think he's any good, I just can't afford it. And I'm honest with them, and they respect that. So that's my approach.
And I'll just add, and Maury said it earlier, right? So we're talking about the marketing deals that we've done for some of the big-name athletes that we're fortunate to work with, and those are the anecdotes that we're sharing because we probably think that they're most interesting. But as Maury said, the business is not made on the Derek Jeters and the Kevin Durants. The business is made on the B and C players. And I think that goes to answer your question, Hayes, which is how important is recruiting, right? And we can talk about marketing deals and the excitement that comes with them all day, but the economics of the business is made on the percent of player contract, not on the percent of marketing deals. So whereas it's fun, and I think we're pretty good at it, to have a sustainable agency the size that ours specifically is, you have to have a lot of B and C level clients because the percent of that team contract, and specifically we do baseball, basketball, golf, have a couple football players, or a race car driver, and 1 artist. But on the team sports side, those contracts, especially in baseball with no salary cap, are so large that the percentage there, even if we don't make a cent from them on marketing, that's what keeps the lights on. So in those cases, again, back to Maury's point, that's where getting car deals and reservations and club access and those things become exciting. I'm not going to talk about it necessarily here, but that's what keeps the recruiting coming, because you need that percent, whatever it is, and it varies by agency, to keep the lights on and pay our salaries.
Yeah, I think one thing too on recruiting and how it's changed, as I see Abe over there, I think in the last 10 years, you've seen more print journalists become broadcast journalists. And I think, I don't know, you've probably recruited a lot of them, but, you know, for many years, print journalists did not make a lot of money. And, you know, so part of it was they were just turning to broadcast to make some extra dollars. But some of them, if you look at Adam Schefter and Chris Mortensen and on and on and on, you know, and we represent a lot of reporters, you know, there's a real, you know, change in our culture. But when news has become so important in sports, every network now has reporters. And I think, you know, that's a pretty good way to recruit as well.
Okay.
I think we should open up to questions now.
Yeah, let's do that. Anyone have any questions? Raise your hand. Introduce yourself.
I'm Brian Payne, Marion University, Fond du Lac, Wisconsin. My question is there ever a point in which your beliefs will contradict that of a possible client, or does the size of your group affect where that point would be where you decide just to pass on that?
I mean, as I said earlier, I firmly believe that if your beliefs are not in line, the relationship's not going to end well. And you know, now there could be a certain client that, well, they're just too big, you're going to just change your beliefs. But I mean, for the most part, I think a client's going to sign with an agent or an agency based on a mutual understanding and you know, a mutual set of beliefs. And for the most part, I could tell. When we've signed people, I could tell going in, I've told some of my people, I guarantee you this is not going to work. And it usually, you know, doesn't.
Along those lines, you know, we keep talking about marketing with players. There are a lot of reporters and anchors who think they should be in national television commercials and marketed. And if the expectations are, yeah, my expectations are I want to be in commercials, I want to be marketed, right then and there, I'm no interest, because I don't think I could be successful in marketing them, and we'll end it right there. And it's so important at the beginning to tell them that. And even though you might turn down a nice commission on their broadcasting side, they're not going to be happy. And when you talk back to recruiting for 1 second, well, when you go recruit, on my website, I'm pretty open. You see all my clients. I'm a small company. And I always tell any recruit, go call anybody on that list. Go call anybody on that list, and you can ask about me. If I have clients on there who are not happy because we're not delivering because their expectations were, oh my God, you didn't get me these commercials, that's going to hurt me for recruiting. So it all fits in together. You really got to be, back to the word selective and who you work with, and clear as to what you can and cannot deliver.
My name is Naz. I'm from the University of Nebraska. You guys talked a little bit about recruiting, and just like previously from our bigger session earlier with this reforming college athletics and the autonomy that this Power 5 conference got, do you guys see a future in representation in college athletes?
I mean, while they're in college?
Yeah, so with this autonomy now, there's a lot of rules within the NCAA that are getting lifted. Do you guys, is it something that as agents you guys think about that possibly there will be a business there?
Nobody wants to attack that question. So I'll try and come up with something for you. Sure. I'm taking the time so they can think of something. But again, I represent announcers, not current athletes. If I wanted to represent current athletes, I would try to represent current athletes. I don't think it makes sense for me personally to try and represent college athletes. I still think there's so much that has to be done in that area, right, in terms of what's going to be resolved. And there's just so many headaches, and I just don't think the dollars are going to be there. And as a traditionalist, I really wouldn't have interest in doing that personally.
As Dave Brandon said last night at dinner, you know, he said he's against college athletes getting paid. He said most likely athletes at Michigan will get a stipend at some point. And I think, like Maury, I'd be firmly against representing any athlete that's in college. I just don't believe in that. I believe that you're here to get an education. Now there's a fine line between making money for the university and everything that the reform is going into, but I really think it sends the wrong message if IMG started representing students. I might represent my son, that would be about it. But.
I think I echo exactly what these gentlemen said. It's really a hypothetical at this point. But to answer your question specifically, Naz, I think from a marketing standpoint, there's probably, if that were ever to happen, where guys actually started representing college athletes, which I don't think will happen, there's definitely a passion for college athletics, so I think those players would be marketable, but I don't think it'll ever get to that point.
And I also think, if you think about professional athletes, these, to Sandy's point, they're going here to get education to mature. And to be honest, when we do deals, as much as it's on us to service the client, it's also on the client to show up and be interested and be active. And, I'm sure everyone in this room shows up to class on time and does everything, but, just, again, in a hypothetical scenario, there's a lot of risks to be associated with working with a college athlete, just from not that they can't or aren't capable of it, but just haven't matured in that way yet.
Daniel Chinsky, 2014 Michigan grad, now with Paradigm Marketing Group. I was wondering, how did all of you come about to get into talent representation? Because obviously, as a recent grad, those opportunities are few and far between. So, were you recruited for these positions? Were they open? Kind of how did you break into working in agencies?
Probably my story is a lot different than the guys at the end. I fell into it. I went to Syracuse and was a stats guy, a runner, a production guy for broadcast, for networks, and met some announcers, specifically John Madden, and fell into it. But I do, I tell students today, there are 500 universities and colleges where you can get a sports management degree. When I went to school, there were 0. So you don't necessarily, you have to be creative. You have to, whether it's getting in, we all do marketing, we all do sales. So whether you get in marketing or sales or any area in the business, you could develop, you could move on into client management. Even starting with a team or a league, you're still interacting with talent.
And to that point, I fell into it too, just in a different way. To create that distinction, we're marketing agents, and so I worked at the MBA in sales and marketing. I worked in media in sales and marketing, and someone I got connected with someone, so that skill set that I had was related to it, because an athlete, just like the MBA, just like a team, just like a media website, is a property, and so the skill sets that we've taken from all that experience, I know David has a very similar background to me, is how we got into this business. It wasn't as we said we want to be in talent representation per se, right? So I just think a general thing to think about is not saying you want to get into to be an agent. You want to try and find the different skill sets that, from a property standpoint, could be relatable, whether it's a team, league, or athlete.
I guess I'm the only one up here who didn't fall into it. I knew what I wanted to do when I was like 17. My best friend growing up, his dad was an agent. He represented baseball players and hockey players. So I got a chance to meet some pretty cool guys. Like, wow, this is a great job. So when I went to Michigan, got an internship with IMG. I don't even know if Sandy knows that. In my junior year summer, no email back then. Letters and phone calls and persistency. And I got to say, I've interviewed some Michigan undergrads and grads about potential jobs or internships. I don't see a lot of persistency. I don't see a lot of following up, which I'm surprised. And maybe, I don't want to upset him. No, you got to distinguish yourself. There are jobs out there, and I just knew what I wanted to do, so I was able to start with an opportunity with IMG, and then graduated and went with the sports management company, represented talent, and then went to law school and represented players. And I just really fell in love with representing media, on-air talent. But again, when I do meet people and they say they want to get into sports, it's rare that someone says, I really want to get into sports broadcasting representation. It just doesn't happen. So you maybe do have to follow into it a little bit, but be passionate about the media. Be passionate about the announcers. I've interviewed people, and there's like a deer in the headlights when I ask them about who do you like, which announcers do you like on TV today, and they have a hard time. So everyone's like at their phones, everyone's in their iPads, no one's paying attention. But if you want to represent talent, on-air talent, you really got to be, I think, passionate about it.
I think one thing Maury said, which is really important, and this industry is a lot smaller than you think. We all tend to know each other, and we tend to know a lot of the same people. And I think everyone's good at texting and emailing and those forms of communication. I mean, I don't have a Facebook page. I'm not on Twitter. I don't have Instagram. There was one thing I learned, a new one that the students are on.
Pinterest.
Yeah, I don't have any. But what I find that the students and the people who graduated coming out that have good communication skills and that can look you in the eye and have a good interview, to me that goes a long way. I'm not really looking for a well-written email. In fact, I'm not looking for any email. But I'm looking, whether it's a phone call or a meeting or it's a connection, I wouldn't have gotten where I am today without relationships and without persistence, as Maury said. And I really think that today sometimes that gets lost. You have to start forming relationships today and while you're in school. And, you really have to start setting yourself up. And, I heard a term yesterday, the Michigan difference. And I think I could see it here at Michigan. There is a difference here from other schools that I've been to. And I think you should take advantage of that and take advantage of the great alumni network that's here, that you'd have a better, opportunity of landing something that way.
Just one quick addition to that. Don't feel like you're bothering potential employers. To us, as Sandy said, we look for people who are driven. We look for people who cut through. And even if there's no job at the company, ask for an informational interview. So you spend 20, 30 minutes with the person. You learn a lot. You leave the office. Wow, that person's pretty impressive. I've heard so many stories where a month later, we're not hiring, but you get a call from a friend. You guys looking for anybody? Yeah, I just met with someone a month ago. That's how it works. So you got to get in front of people.
Yeah, and I think along those lines, to echo all of what the panel here said, I went to Michigan. I was a sports management major, but I didn't study sports, sponsorship sales or talent representation. It's really about internships, and I think that goes along with meeting people and getting out there and talking to folks and building relationships. I think that's the most important part, and you get some work experience. You learn what you do like, what you don't like, and that's how I learned that I really liked the selling side of sports. You're close to sports, you're taking advantage of people's passions, but I enjoyed the sales part of it. And then as Evan said, it's just different inventory, right? So when I worked for the Mets, you're selling the Mets assets. Now you're selling players. Clearly personalities are different than properties, but like Evan said, they're all properties. You're using the same skill set. You're just finding out what specific about that piece of inventory that you can relate to the brand. But again, I think like everybody said, it's all about relationships, but specifically while in college, internships and experience, because that's how you learn what you like or don't like, and then you can start forming those relationships and then use all the tips they gave you as far as being persistent, follow up, all those things.
Yeah, and, in our business, whether you're doing what David and I do or, working on the contract side of the business or, all the above, it really is, you're selling yourself. So I can't tell you how many times people come in to interview for a sales job, and if you think about it from a sales process perspective, you send out a proposal, I'm sure, 48 hours later, you're following up, you're following up, you're following up. To your point, I can't even tell you how many times, and they were great first impression, but there's no follow-through. And for me, how can I ever trust someone to do the job that, I'm trying to manage people, like Sandy said, if I can't pass it off and they're handling it and that drive, that passion. So you have to really treat it like a salesman, whether you like sales or not, because at the end of the day, you're selling yourself to get a job.
And to that point, there's only so much that the people that are interviewing you can judge you on, right? So the things that you can control, it's important to hammer home. Make sure that your follow-up is correctly punctuated or spelled properly or all of those things. Just ways to differentiate yourself, because even if they seem small to you, we only have so much to evaluate you on, and whatever you give us is what we're going to use. And yes, I made that mistake once. That's why I can speak to it.
Dylan, freshman here at Michigan. For brand marketing, in terms of that, how do you guys handle a situation where Kevin Love with the deal with Starter is wearing a Timberwolves jacket in that ad that they just released, and then gets triggered. So how is that handled? And then that commercial is still airing.
Photoshop. That was actually a specific. We had to fly out a Cavs jacket to the week of his press conference to get a picture taken again. But yeah, those are tough things.
And they happen all the time. You
But-
guys think quickly on your feet.
But Photoshop actually helps too.
Stephanie from Canada, actually, so we're from London, Ontario. So basically, you're talking about managing social media expectations, terminal expectations. How do you take on clients or do that risk assessment when you take on new clients or existing clients that have this social media following that we've never seen before, like have this Instagram account? Or, like in a specific example, we see like there are like six stringers in the NHL, like Hobbies Net, like that kind of social media. He's kind of like a loose cannon on Instagram or on Twitter and that kind of thing. How do you kind of manage that or put that into a kind of contract? What do you kind of look at in those terms? Or research kind of following that? It's such a new avenue.
I don't think we'd put it in a contract that we can't have a client. But I think what we do at IMG is we educate. And through my business with Ari Fleischer, I mean, it's not just the crisis management, it's media training. So it's how do you, after a win in a locker room, how do you treat the reporters with the same respect that you do after a loss? And what you should always, on an email or on Twitter, we always talk to clients about read it before you hit send and think about how it sounds, and exclamation points are yelling at people. So I think it's more of an education process. But there are going to be mistakes. You know, a lot of our clients are the same age, you know, as many of you are. You're going to make mistakes, and it happens. But I think education going in, you know, has helped us.
It's definitely challenging, and I think not only from a social media perspective, but even just from a 24/7 news cycle, the gossip websites, all of those sorts of things. You can't control it. Some of it's rumors. Now, social media, you're assuming came right from that person, specific to your question. But if something shows up on TMZ about a player, or you just have to, you know, sort of do the research and figure out if it's real, and then if it is, communicate with his or her brand partners. But a lot of it, you just have to sort of hope it's not true until it's proved accurate.
One last question.
My name is Z. I'm a senior here at Michigan. I know to a lot of the clients, their families are very important to them, or their significant others. How much time and resources do you guys spend on making sure that aspect of their lives is also taken care of?
Well, I would say that I don't have a lot of friends, but the friends that I have, they're mainly my clients. And, you know, like Mike Tirico's a client. He was the first panel this morning. I was sitting with his son, who was a freshman in high school. So I think it's part of, you know, for me, it's the part of the job that I like. I enjoy getting to know clients and their families and going to, you know, their kids' games and all that. So I think it's important, but it's also something that, you know, I would think most of us enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, once you sign a client, it's not just a client, it's their family. I mean, and they become part of your family. Now, you always walk that line because there are always, you know, expectations along, you know, that perspective with different family members and such. And again, that's just something you do through the recruiting process, understanding who you are entering into a relationship with.
Well, cool. It's an honor. It's a pleasure to give these guys a round of applause.
Thanks, guys.